Before we begin, if you have a free moment, please consider subscribing to this channel, where I will talk about various kinds of content and eventually take part in all sorts of other wonderful things to keep that bustling, cute little squishy mind of yours busy, my friend. Additionally, I will do a voice reveal in due time. All good things come in time, and subscribers, my dear. Now, onwards. Here we go again. I see the same issue, time in and time out, of people attacking artists for once drawing things that they find gross or unacceptable. My dears, I have two requests for you. One is to please share this video anywhere you see people criticizing cheese pizza art or any kind of art that is usually viewed as disgusting. You may link it under other videos on this topic so that more understanding can be spread to all sides of this argument. This video is likely to get bunked by the system, so the only way it can reach anyone is by you doing your part in spreading it, even if only just to disagree with it. Of course, I disagree with this kind of art. However, we need to be aware of some things in this situation. And before I officially begin this rant, I'm going to start by directly speaking to Streamline Workshop. Stream, in your video, at exactly 27:29, you claim the artwork is cheese pizza. If it is, then you have spread cheese pizza material by including screenshots of the artwork in your video, even if it's heavily clipped, because the clipping themselves still display material that is directly meant to sexually stimulate people. So, if you genuinely believe the material is exploitation, you must also remove this material from your video, thank you. More thought should go into the action of ranting about this kind of material, so please be careful for the future. Also, please add a loudness warning for the jump scare at 52:58. It made me laugh, but also scared the piss out of a friend of mine. Moving on, let's talk about that kind of art. Let's start with the who, the what, the when, and the why. Who is Blog? Blog makes Undertale art and some kind of comic series. The comics do feature characters entering incestuous relationships and having close cuddles with adults, all kinds of paraphilic things with cheese. Do I personally like this kind of art? No, not at all. When I was younger, I found it constantly online, because at the time, online security for minors wasn't really a thing, and it wasn't a good time. I don't believe any of this art should be publicly visible. This should be a given. Lewd content that people are not looking for should not be accessible, especially content that could be dangerous to minors. Now that I made that point, we all know Blog's art was fully public to the internet. But I would like you to look at the date of these posts. This all happened over 5 years ago. That was PewDiePie Plays Corpse Party days. I looked through their entire Twitter, and they have not posted anything even remotely similar to their old content in over 4 years. 2 years ago, they also made a post explaining how they do not want any children seeing their NSFW art. 4 years ago, almost immediately after making their art, they stopped. So, this took place in the early days of the Undertale fandom, around 2015. This next part is critical. To clarify, at that time, tagging wasn't such a big thing. There was a massive amount of fanfics depicting everything similar to what Blog was drawing. I remember explicit fanfics, non-con, minor to adult non-con, adult to minor non-con, etc. All untagged, or untagged for the most part. Very easily searchable. It just wasn't common for people to actively ensure that minors aren't looking at their inappropriate content. Perhaps most of you are very young, and don't remember how it was only 5 years ago or so, but the internet was far wilder. It was far more normal to do these things, if you're into them. The context of the situation is critical to understand why this was happening, and why this person drew things like this, in the public eye, and with very little shame. You absolutely can't just blindly poke at someone without also taking the context into account, and so to avoid being unfair, I have to make this a point. Everything needs at least some context, so that we can be properly informed, and so that we can avoid making the same mistakes we keep making throughout history. Avoiding bias through understanding context is crucial for a speaker to master, in order to correctly inform people. Most people assumed that parents had a full grasp on everything their children were doing. It was less common for children to have access to multiple devices at that time, where they can use Tumblr and anything else without being observed. On top of that, the repercussions of minors seeing this content also wasn't a big deal, at least as far as I can remember from those days. Worst of all, most people assume that children can grasp the distinction between fantasy and reality, and fully believe that children seeing their fetishes had no real direct consequence, because it was believed that fantasy art simply doesn't impact people. I mean it. On all of my ventures on the internet from back in the day, I've only now encountered people telling others that it's wrong to expose children to these things. You would think it's logical, but I believe people had higher expectations of children's ability to process lewd content. I think most people were just severely uninformed, and it isn't like minors could tell them that they need to stop. It should have been taken seriously, but it just simply wasn't discussed. However, Blog has confirmed on their Twitter that since they have found out about the importance of this, they will always be doing it from now on, though it seems they no longer make this kind of art, and haven't for a very long time. Over 4 years, in fact. Now keep this point in mind. I do believe that all of this should have been taken more seriously by Blog even at the time, but Blog clearly has a paraphilic mental illness. Blog's response. Blog's first response to everything, however, was abysmal. Yes, keep in mind that there are 2 responses, one is old, the other is new, it was made just this year in January. Before I saw their first response, I was rather accepting of the idea that all of this is just a big attempt to bring up 5-year-old trash that really could have stayed in the dumpster of a long-dead identity that has since evolved and changed. However, after seeing their first response, that feeling changed. Everything Stream said in her video about this response was spot on. Sadly, Blog's first response to everything shows us all that in fact, they believed for a very long time that drawing minor adult art for minors was perfectly okay, and this is all just an attempt by ranters to make something political, and that we're sticking our noses into their business. Oh dear. No, old Blog, this isn't political. This is tackling something that normalized incest and pedophilia for many people, unfortunately. And people don't find this acceptable because they have since grown up and realized that it had distorted their thinking and childhood. Your first response should have taken people other than yourself into consideration. In fact, you didn't seem to understand why what you are excusing is quite so wrong. You don't need to defend yourself here, you need to simply, respectfully acknowledge that your past content had a negative effect on some people, and apologize properly. Just comply with basic human decency. We all understand this is fiction that you made, but it was being spread to minors. There are even people on Tumblr who are making posts explaining how your art normalized paraphilia to them, so you can't claim it didn't affect people. Let's take a look at one here. BlogTheGreatRouge seems to be becoming a topic that's resurfacing over their old art of sansist stuff. I'm not really discussing what they drew, but how it affected me being 12 at the time of watching dubs of that content by Undertale Peasant. So to start, the main ones I watched were the daycare one and the one with Fresh and Paperjam, where Jam is younger and Fresh is seemingly an adult. I didn't have any social media at the time and didn't have the attention span to figure out how to use Tumblr, so I never followed BlogTheGreatRouge or saw the other problematic comics. The topics of pedophilia never crossed my mind as being bad when I watched these videos as a kid. The part in the daycare comic where Jam gets called a pedophile didn't make sense to me, though. When they were saying the word pedo, I had no idea what it meant, and honestly just went with it without ever looking up what a pedophile was. The stuff before with younger Fresh didn't come across to me as being anything serious, the parts where he asked Jam to marry him. I remember my mom telling me I had some weird toddler crush on one of my dad's coworkers who never engaged with me, like at all, BTW, and just assumed this was an instance of lol small kid has a crush on an adult, how silly. But with how much it was played up, and how the asks encouraged Fresh later on to ruin Jam's date, I assumed I was supposed to agree with this. Like, as if this was what I was supposed to root for, so I did. I'm lucky this didn't lead to me getting taken advantage of or being groomed later on, but I have heard of some who weren't so fortunate. I did eventually learn this wasn't an okay thing to promote, luckily. Until this whole situation resurfaced, though, I hadn't realized how seriously troublesome the daycare stuff was. Onto the comic about Fresh and Jam, where Jam seems to be a teen and Fresh an adult. I didn't pick up on the difference of maturity or age to be a bad thing. When I saw it, it all sounded like some sort of smut or something, which, as much as I am embarrassed to admit, I was already introduced to the topic of smut by some roleplay friends of mine I had on musical.ly, which for some reason I was allowed to have at 12, who were all just 1 year older than me. but definitely at different stages in life of being introduced to sexual content, whereas I hadn't even started puberty yet, and it all seemed normal to me. I saw that the ship was being glorified and encouraged, and I assumed this must be okay, despite it displaying an imbalance in maturity and age between the characters, which could be interpreted as manipulation, when you really think about it. Final thoughts. So as I mentioned before, I was 12 when I consumed this content. I'm 16 now, which isn't the height of maturity and understanding, but I think I can say I'm nowhere close to being as naive as I was 4 years ago. I think that having paper age play fantasies, when both parties are adults and understand the situation, is only to fulfill a fetish and shouldn't be mimicked is okay. But being 12, I couldn't discern content perpetuating a fetish, though it's pretty clearly pro-ship stuff that edges the line with what should be called legal, from how to behave in reality. I didn't seek out older men, thankfully, and none came to me to try and take advantage of me, probably because my musical.ly account was literally just a Warrior Cats roleplay account with no pictures of me on it, but it did warp how I saw the comic and content that was similar. The first introduction to the subject of pedophilia, for anyone, should not be in the form of work that plays it off as a gag or okay at all. That's all I really have to say. Have a good day night. There are many more people who had similar experiences, albeit with actual contact with adults, but I can't read all of the posts made on this topic. And even if it was one person, just one person, you should still understand that person, or at least try to. You cannot have a social platform while also displaying asocial and unempathetic behavior like this. But, dear listeners, that was Blog's first apology on Tumblr, where they are no longer active. Since then, they have made a more fleshed out apology, and I'd like to focus on the last part of that said apology. I did not condone to anything I drew back then, I just only knew that you can draw anything as long as it's fictional. Now I know better. I am sorry for the lack of care at the time. It has been a lot of years since then. I already promised it'll never happen again. Now this definitely sounds a lot better. This is a more appropriate response. And it is true, for the past 4 years I have not seen any problematic and untagged content come out of blog, hence why I believe this apology overrides the old one, and should be taken much more into account. I'm not saying that we need to forgive blog, but I am saying that we need to understand just how fluid someone's identity can be, and how much people truly change over the years. While the apology comes off a little strained, we also don't know how good blog is at actually communicating apologies. It's not a skill everyone has. Hopefully, everyone learns it in time. That brings me to my main point in this video. Perhaps we need a statute of limitations on these sorts of unethical online behaviors. I'm speaking broadly here. This isn't really that much about blog anymore. In 5 years, a lot changes with a person. In fact, every 7 years, it is said that a person's entire external personality can undergo a refresh. Sometimes, much sooner. In 4 years after I make this video, we are all likely going to be very different people. Current culture and context does matter in how we act as people, and as culture changes, so do we. Identity and change is real and constant. The jokes you are making right now will not be funny in 5 years, maybe they will even become offensive. All of that actually matters, and as culture and context change, so do people. People very often come to realize that what they did in the past does not represent their current self, which is practically replaced every few years or so. We must understand that identity is fluid. Almost everyone who has old jokes brought up in lines of attacks against them have never made the same content they used to make again, and it's certainly because their identity has changed, and they have grown as people to fully appreciate that their jokes were wrong. They have learned from those mistakes as the issue hasn't repeated itself. That is why I can never agree with hating an influencer for their past actions, if those actions took place several years ago, and the influencer has never repeated them since that time. Especially if the influencer makes a genuine apology. Keyword: genuine. It's a dead subject. In fact, it's downright insulting to someone's identity to assume that they are who they were years ago. If you drag out someone's past, it's insulting to them, especially if their current identity no longer reflects their past identity. Of course, it depends, but I especially believe that more understanding should be afforded to individuals who participated in older internet culture and grew up in it when everything was wilder and no boundaries existed. It takes time to learn boundaries. Another point about identity. Once again, if you have any respect for mental health, you should know this. You can see identities being fluid aspects of a single human conscious in conditions such as did. If those conditions exist to you, then you must also believe that identity is a mobile and changeable part of the mind. It's too easy for all of us to look at the past of a creator and say they are disgusting, but it sure is hard to do that with what we are currently facing right now. We really should be thinking about current identities that need change and trying to intercept modern day issues as well. At least do a mix of the two. Come on ranters, I know you have it in you. The fact that what blog was making was publicly available and apparently wasn't properly tagged is wrong. But we all really need some perspective here. While blog is being attacked despite having stopped for the past couple years, there are people out there who are still currently drawing children and who aren't even aware that it is wrong. We should be finding more people who are presently doing this instead of strawmanning a content creator who has not endorsed their own content for ages. For hell's sake, if you even Google image the names of these characters, don't though, you will find popular inappropriate art of them. See, the issue with this is that the list of currently offending artists would be enormous. You have plenty of fresh content, so let's not go after people who have likely already been through therapy and change. Unless they offend, of course. You attacking these people over their past actions could force them to self-isolate, which may cause them to relapse into their harmful thoughts and fantasies. You not accepting someone's attempt at a decent apology is also destructive to that person's progress with their paraphilia. Please be more constructive, more mindful of how others change, and please be aware of how fluid people's identities really are,